Hi, everyone. If you're dreaming of working and traveling in Portugal, this is for you. I'm Safia, the co founder of Nomad Junkies, and today we're going to talk about living and traveling in Portugal with the Working Holiday Visa or the Youth Mobility Visa, as they call it. So let's welcome our guest, Wiam. Hi, Wiam.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. Um, so tell us, what drove you to apply for a youth mobility visa in Portugal?
Things started a bit before the pandemic, so just before the pandemic hit. Um, at that point, I haven't gone on a adventure before, and I decided to visit San Francisco, November 2019. And it was a really life-changing experience for me because there was so many elements about the visit that really pushed me to seek discomfort and learn more about myself that I couldn't really get in a city like Toronto. So I decided to sort of use this initiative and sort of push me beyond my comfort zone after the pandemic happened and thinking, you know, nothing makes sense during the pandemic, so why should I conform to it? And let me try something new and push myself beyond the boundaries. And Portugal just seemed to fit all the right boxes, so that's really why I went for it.
I know that you're a very pragmatic person, so you went about a very rational way to decide on Portugal. Why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, basically, when I was deciding, I wanted to make sure I didn't leave any box unchecked and did a thorough research. And then I did a diagram, like a Venn diagram, to ensure that I don't miss any boxes. So the first one was places that speak English properly because I didn't want to learn a new language when I'm traveling. Like that was going to be uncomfortable, especially if it's a short travel, you know. Um, the second was places that are relatively cheap within or like accommodation wise. I also looked for the sunniest places in Europe. So when you combine all three aspects, you get a few cities, which is easier to sort of narrow your search than like to look at the entire scope. And then once I had like, I was thinking three cities, which is Porto, Lisbon, and Madrid or Barcelona, like maybe four. Then I asked a lot of my friends that travel and said, hey, since you've been to these places, what is the place you think I would get along with the most? And three out of four said Lisbon. So I went for Lisbon. And then once I figured I'm going to Lisbon, I actually have a notebook that I had with me. I don't know. Let's show you on the camera. Once I realized I'm going to Lisbon and I saw the map, I realized that the city resembled San Francisco a lot. So I'm like, oh, that's perfect because I had a strong emotional connection with San Francisco and I didn't want to sort of lose that outside of the US. So it was meant to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you're right. Lisbon and San Francisco are considered like sister cities or something. So that's really cool that you felt that pull, and but you still went through a rational decision making process. For those of you that just joined and that are really unclear about what we're talking about, so Liam did a working holiday visa that allows him to work and travel in Portugal, but it's also possible to do that in more than 30 countries as a Canadian aged 18 to 35. So we'll put the link below for International Experience Canada, where you can find all the details on this amazing life-changing experience. And I'm talking because I also did a working holiday visa in Australia. So it's common knowledge if you've done one of those experiences that it's a life-changing one. So how did your family and friends react when you told them that you were going to travel and work in Portugal?
That was a difficult thing to share, honestly. Primarily because I've been living in Toronto for over 10 years at that point. And why would you want to move? Everyone was so like surprised. I'm not known to take like weird decisions all of a sudden. But little did they know that I've been planning it for over 2 years, and it wasn't like something that is something I'm ready to jump on very like sporadically. So when I talked to them and explained, I found a lot of them were not supportive for this shift, except for the very, very close friends, because they understood where I'm coming from. But everyone was saying, it's stupid that you're going in a time where there's COVID. It's unrational that you're deciding to do this huge shift in your life and become a digital nomad. And to me, it was like, that's not really the point. The point is pushing myself beyond my comfort zone, because I've gotten so used to being in a city like Toronto that I wanted to reinvent myself and discover more about what I can do and how I can live life differently. And that wasn't going to be possible if I stayed in Toronto. I mean, everyone knows it's extremely expensive. You need to work at least 2 jobs to like maintain a good lifestyle. And it was getting to a point where I'm like, how long will I sustain this lifestyle? Because, you know, it's not something that I wanted to withstand my whole life.
That's not what you had envisioned for yourself.
Exactly.
Wow.
So yeah, they ended up accepting because they had no other choice.
They had no choice. And had you been abroad before? Because you mentioned San Francisco, but did you have any other long-term experience abroad?
No, San Francisco was the longest experience I had. It was like 2 weeks. And it was the first time I went alone on a trip. So before that, I would do like 2-day trips to New York or Texas or whatever, but I never really stepped into this huge discomfort space, which is on your own to a place you don't know. And San Francisco was that like lovely step that I took, because if it was any other city, probably I wouldn't have enjoyed it. Or maybe I'm jaded. I don't know.
You did mention that this seed got planted 2 years prior to going to work and travel in Portugal. But is this how long you planned for?
Realistically speaking, it only took 4 months to like from the day I decided this is happening to the day I finally like flew. And the process was rather simple. There was a lot of elements, obviously, but it's rather simple because I approached it very pragmatically, like you said. So I started with researching a lot, understanding the culture, what I'm putting myself into. Cost of living was a huge thing because I was afraid like my salary wouldn't work if I was working remotely. So I needed to have this comfort that like it's actually going to be much cheaper to go there than to stay in Toronto for the for the planning, like for the months I was planning to go.
Which can be surprising for many people watching, that you made the calculation and living at home in Canada was going to be more expensive than living abroad in Portugal.
Yeah, and it was surprising because there was 2 factors involved. One, the fact that I was quitting my job and moving to a part-time job. So that meant that I was going to be getting paid less. You would assume that I would be making less money, but that wasn't the case. So it was a huge learning experience for me, especially that like learning that taxation system in Canada is bracketed, and that's not something you get to learn until you cross the bracket. Like you learn about theoretically, but you don't really learn how it affects you until you cross the bracket. So the first time that happened, I was working in marketing and I switched to engineering consulting after I graduated. And my salary moved backwards because now I was paying twice as much taxes and I didn't cross the boundary by too much. So I was really surprised that like, oh, so if you make more money, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get net profit increase. And obviously engineering is a very difficult job, and consulting involved a lot of travel. Like I worked all over Canada and Ontario. We worked with the federal government. So there was a lot of stress involved. So I was like, is it worth working that much to get not a lot more money after a long time of working? Like after 4 years, then I got back to the same threshold of net income. And so when I did the math and I said, okay, I'm going to drop to part-time job, which means that my tax bracket is going to decrease. And then my rent is going to decrease drastically. Like I was paying close to 1,500 for rent in Toronto, which is actually pretty cheap, mind you, because I've been there for over 4 years. And then I was going to be paying like $500 a month for rent, included electricity and internet and everything in Lisbon. And it was like downtown. So that alone was like, okay, so I'm going to decrease my income, but I'm actually going to make more money. And so that was the fuel that got me like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Just go try it. Worst case scenario, you're going to learn something and come back after a year and go back to engineering, and you won't lose anything if you don't like something, but you lose a lot if you don't try. So
I have to agree with that. And so can you walk us a little bit through the step-by-step that you went through to apply for that youth mobility visa to Portugal?
Sure. First, I didn't know the different types of visas because every country has their own visa system, and there was like 7 different types of visas in Portugal. So I joined a Facebook group called Canadians in Portugal or something like that. There's a lot of different groups, but it was really useful to join that because I realized a lot of people had the same questions as I did, and some people were pioneers in trying to organize ways to help support people who had these questions. And so I saw someone else who had published their D7 visa application, which is like when someone goes and tries to immigrate, sort of some form of immigration visa. And then I looked up the website of the Portuguese embassy and I saw the youth mobility visa, and I'm like, okay, that's the one that's going to suit me. And then I went through all the different steps, getting all the paperwork done, sending an email to the embassy, going to the embassy, submitting the application, going through the different processes. And then I wrote everything down, and I created a document to also support people looking at this kind of visa.
So you then became the pioneer in that Canadians in Portugal group.
Yeah, basically. It's you're either a leader or a follower.
And after going through all of the bureaucratic process, you became a leader.
Yeah, because I noticed there was a lot of details that weren't mentioned on the website that were very crucial. So I couldn't not put the information there and support the endeavor of people. Because also there's something that people don't know is there is a limit to how many applications are issued every year in the youth mobility sector. So the more people learn about the youth mobility, the less likely that you'll have a chance to go in that specific year. So when I was applying, it was towards the end of the year. So I wanted to help support as many people because I saw that the limit wasn't reached yet. But yeah, every year there's more sort of public awareness about this. There's going to be less chances that people go. So if you're listening to this, it's not too late. There's obviously lots of spaces still left before the end of the year.
And Portugal is such a popular destination at the moment. There's so many deals. I'm sure like many people that are watching either went themselves or have friends or family that have gone to Portugal with all of those travel deals. But you did mention that you will be generous enough to share your knowledge. And so we'll put the link down in the comment to this Bible that Wayam did for applying for the youth mobility visa to Portugal. So thank you so much. But if you have any other questions, make sure to visit the International Experience website. So we'll also put a link to that in the comment, because in there you'll find information and details to apply for the working holiday visa or the youth mobility visa, not only for Portugal, but for all the other 30 countries where we can apply as Canadians. So carry on. Like where did you find all of this information to create your Bible?
Honestly, it was a lot of research because the information is somewhere on the internet, and if it's not there, it's with the embassy. So the sheet I wrote was specifically applying from Ontario, but it's very similar to the others, but the addresses and everything. So if you are applying from outside of Ontario, please, add the information that you find along the way to the list. And if there's anything new, obviously every year there's going to be some changes. So also make sure to add these. The way I went around it is just walking the walk. Like the first time I reached out to the embassy, they told me, yeah, you can submit the application online and it'll be fine. And then when I did, I didn't hear back from them for a while. So then I emailed them again and I said, I didn't hear back from you. I didn't hear back again. So then I went to their office in downtown Toronto. And then they said, oh, the person you were talking to was actually on vacation for a month. So although the person told me you can apply online, he wasn't available to respond to my emails again. And then they were really supportive about it because they were like a bit shocked by that. But bureaucracy happens everywhere, especially in Lisbon and Portugal. So be ready to deal with weird situations. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different process. And so when I went to the office in person, I gathered more information and I updated the document as well. But it was very smooth. Like once you establish a connection and you have someone that's not on vacation, that's dealing with your file, then it's a quick process. They were actually very supportive.
That's amazing. And so now you finally have your visa, you're ready to go, you bought your ticket. And you arrived in the country. What were your first impressions of Portugal?
Actually, it was a difficult sort of landing, if you wish, because as soon as I landed, I got an email saying that the people I was supposed to stay with in the Airbnb had COVID, so I couldn't go to my Airbnb. And then I was at the airport trying to call Airbnb and figure out like a solution to book another place. And Airbnb was also supportive. And it's not an ad. We're just, narrating the story. And so I booked another space and I was really grateful because it turned out to be a great new space to discover. And the process was rather interesting because I arrived, it was like maybe 2 p.m. or something. And I'm like, so excited to go try out the restaurants, and I go for a walk and I realized restaurants close between 3 and 7 or 3:30 and 7 or something like that. And I'm like, but I'm hungry. I'm supposed to eat. So then I walk into a supermarket and I'm like figuring out, how to communicate with people, and then going to the cashier and having a little bit of cash, and she's talking and I'm trying to grasp what she's saying. And then and then she looked at me and she realized I'm confused and she started speaking English. So I'm like, okay, this is not that bad.
It's true that you could pass as Portuguese though. So I can understand maybe the confusion.
Yeah. Some people think I'm Italian. Some people think I'm Portuguese, but I'm actually of Lebanese descent. So similar, Mediterranean, Mediterranean.
Yeah, the same vibe.
Pretty much.
And, are there any things that you had to do specifically once you arrived in the country in terms of the visa?
In terms of the visa, you didn't really need to do anything unless you wanted to get a job locally. So that was what I was planning to do, but I didn't know that. So that was another thing that took me by surprise. Because when I landed, I started looking for jobs locally, and just to compare, because I was working part-time and I'm thinking maybe I can transition to something full-time here that would be more reasonable instead of working online. And I applied to a few jobs. There's a lot of...
Can you just tell us how did you find the jobs? What resources you used to help you find a job?
I started looking on Indeed and I realized that there's not a lot of opportunities there because they use different websites and stuff than in North America. And then I Googled jobs for English speaking individuals in Portugal. And there's a lot of websites that tailor to that, because there's a lot of, once you arrive to places like Lisbon, you'll realize how many immigrants come there to spend the year, or just how many tourists in general, which is kind of shocking. Like compared to Toronto, you don't find as much tourists in Canada, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
So you ended up finding a job through these resources because you said you applied for a few jobs.
yeah, so I got a few interviews, and one of them was like, you're accepted, but we want your paperwork. So I was like, what paperwork? And they told me about something similar to the SIN number we have in Canada, but I don't remember the name. You probably know it because you've also been there.
Yeah, I think it's the
Uh,
NIF.
NIF, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And so for that, you needed to have an address. So I went ahead and I actually opened a bank account using Revolut, where they send you, it's like a virtual online bank, and then they send you the card information, everything to your address. So I used the opportunity, like Airbnb address, and I got that processed. I had to have a phone number too, so I got a local phone number. And I didn't end up applying for the NIF because I didn't want to go through the process. Plans changed after a while, but the process isn't super difficult. You just need to do your research to figure out what steps to take, I guess.
You also mentioned that you stayed, well, you tried to stay at a first Airbnb, which didn't work out. So you stayed at another Airbnb. But is this the only kind of accommodation you stayed at during your whole time in Portugal?
Um, like legally, yes, like legal accommodation, but I was staying with a lot of people that I met there, because moving around the city and making friends, and uh, like you'll realize Portugal is a melting pot of so many cultures. So it was very easy for me to meet other expats. There was a lot of Americans and Canadians. There was British, German, a lot of French. So to me, it was like connecting to the whole world in one space. And I made a lot of friends going to meetup groups. There's meetup groups for English speakers
Okay.
and for expats and for digital nomads, and
So that's a
so
good
it's
way
really
to.
easy to make friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, I even made friends from being on the beach one day. Like I was on the beach, and then there was a group of French people, and they were just having fun and drinking, and I was passing by, and we spoke a little French, and then they invited me over to their house, and they had a party, and it was like, wow, people are so friendly here. I mean, this would never happen in Toronto.
Yeah, different culture. And to go back to accommodation, what resources could help someone who'd like to go do a youth mobility visa in Portugal? What resources could they use to find accommodation?
Definitely Airbnb, because I was actually staying with a family and not alone. I was thinking, because I don't know the language, what if I needed some help or something? It was more comfortable for me to start by being with a family, thinking later on maybe I can change that accommodation. But I found a lot of Airbnb hosts have like people living in the house, and the apartments are pretty large there. So, you best believe it's pretty comfortable to be in an Airbnb with people living in that space too. And I also like I was looking at other accommodation and rentals, but there's not a like I didn't find a lot of easy ways to rent for a short period of time, other than like Airbnb or other similar websites that they have, because most of them they require like a year-long lease, and I'm not going to take a year-long lease if I'm not sure if I'm going to stay there for years. So I'd say always start with something that you can get out of easily, and then transition if you need to,
Yeah, that's a
and
good.
you don't lose anything in the process.
Yeah, and so for making meeting people and making new friends, you've recommended using Meetup. Also, you had
Facebook too,
Facebook. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
because of the like the expat groups, Canadians in Portugal, and there was a lot of people there that not only were, interested in meeting, but also um, a few of them offered jobs too. So if you're not sure, for example, you're going to find a job in your career, you can ask on the group, and some people are looking for jobs. I got two offers before I even went to Portugal, but because I delayed my flight, I didn't end up getting them. But the idea is it's a very supportive group, and if you need any help, yeah, it's a great space to start.
Wow, definitely a good tip. And so, what would you say are the main differences between living in Canada and living in Portugal? Do you feel like you had to adjust or adapt?
Um, I mean, there's a few things that are very distinct about Portugal. The culture, people tend to drink early in the morning instead of after midnight. So that was something I didn't expect. When they socialize, like they could be drinking beer at 10 in the morning. Um, Also, their food is different, so that was also like I found myself more explorative, wanting to learn about they eat a lot of seafood, which is good for me because I'm a pescatarian, and um, I found myself learning a lot about their culture by going out a lot, which is something that we don't do in Toronto because it's so expensive. So that was different lifestyle. Like even when the minimum wage in Portugal is, or in Lisbon is 700 euros a month, you could still go out within those 700 euros, because because in general, going out to restaurants and stuff is much cheaper than it is in Toronto. So I found myself living more and like exploring more, going to the beach and sitting in a park, because sitting in a park all of a sudden was not a scary thing. I'm not saying it's terribly scary, but like there are certain parks that are kind of fishy in Toronto. Um, so I never thought of like working from a park, for example, because there's spaces that have Wi-Fi in the park. People sit, they drink coffee, or they drink juice. They make a lot of fresh juices, which is nice. And so the lifestyle was complete, 180. I'm used to sitting in an office all day. Yeah, yeah, and I was working like 10 hours a week, and able to sustain myself and live much more lavishly than I was working 40 hours a week, and plus a side job, and it was just so weird. It was life changing.
Yeah, you learn how to live life to the fullest, basically.
Yeah, and I was working like 10 hours a week, and able to sustain myself and live much more lavishly than I was working 40 hours a week,
Right.
and plus a side job, and it was just so weird. It was
And
life
so,
changing.
what kind of job did you end up having?
I was lucky because I had a lot of networking and connections within non-for-profits in Toronto. I was doing a lot of work with my marginalized groups after COVID started. I initiated sort of a platform to help deal with mental health, called Meditate for Change. And it was at the time when COVID hit, and it was really affecting everyone in Toronto. And because I was connected with a lot of individuals, I had a social incubation or social enterprise that I called Beyond Toronto Life, that we used to do a lot of urban hiking every week, and there was over 2,000 members in it. I had it for over 6 years. And so when COVID hit and we couldn't go out and walk together, a lot of us, I started hearing their stories and their suffering. So I wanted to support them somehow. And I realized that I had a secret weapon through meditation, because I've been a meditator all my life. So I started doing like online guided meditations and teaching people how to meditate. And then I found myself being called to do workshops within the minority groups, especially like refugees and queer community, and um, people who are dealing with a lot of stress and homelessness. Um, so afterwards, because I made these connections, it was easy for me to I got a part-time job as a facilitator and recruiter in one of the non-for-profits. And then slowly I started a whole new career because of it. And now I'm doing DEI consulting for impact resolutions, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops and consulting. And I'm so satisfied with the work because I see the impact that I have. And I then started studying life coaching, and like my life trajectory shifted once I realized that I can do more than the 9 to 5 that I was destined to be part of in the engineering world.
And moving to Portugal and kind of pursuing that digital nomad lifestyle and being able to work remotely. So that shift to Portugal, would you say it kind of pushed you even more forward in that direction?
Yeah, it was the catalyst. It was like, okay, so now that you're here and you realize that you have time because I was working less, and you have money because I was making relatively more money or profit, that now is the right time to pursue focusing on my own business, on advancing myself. So then I started, my initiative, Meditate for Change, and I started life coaching and sort of working myself through to figure out all the details of working remotely and that kind of thing.
So now that we know all about how you found a job, how you applied for the youth mobility visa and everything, can you tell us how is it with the language barrier with not speaking Portuguese in Portugal? Did you encounter any funny or weird situation that resulted from being lost in translation?
There's obviously a lot of things that you think you want to learn. I was thinking like I'm gonna sign up for language school, and in order to be able to get my daily life activities done. But that's not really the case with Lisbon, because there's a lot of expats. People expect you to not know Portuguese, and so if you know like the basic gestures to say hello or goodbye, or the number is very important, because when you go to cash out, they always tell you the number in Portuguese, and they use a lot of cash too. So knowing how to like understand the numbers of the coins and stuff. So once you establish a communication, you get started, they usually like figure out like your Portuguese doesn't sound perfect, so let's switch to English. And a lot of them speak pretty good conversational English. I wouldn't say like they're experts in the language, but they'd like to learn more. So they use it as an opportunity to open an English dialogue and sort of get their practicing done. So it was the opposite of what I expected. And so then I didn't really have much troubles dealing with that.
That's quite funny. Yeah. So not really in Portuguese, but French caught you a little bit off guard.
Yeah, and you realize that like the basic language of life is motion, or like physical language. So if you say, I'm hurt, I need the doctor, usually people understand. You just point out to something, or like when I first arrived, I needed to charge my phone. So I'm like like when you showcase like what you want, people tend to understand without you using vocal language.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about one of the biggest fear people have when it comes to traveling long term, and it's money. So did you have any money saved up before you left? And if so, what was your security blanket that you allowed for yourself?
Yeah, so because again, super pragmatic, everything I do, I had saved up for a year in advance, because I didn't want to. So when I found out that it was much cheaper to live abroad than it is in Toronto, I was like, oh, I actually have enough for maybe at the time 8 months or so. And then I saved some more, and then I was like, okay, I secure myself for a year in case I don't get any jobs, whatever. I discovered I didn't end up using any of my savings because like living expenses were decreased. So
the money you made during the youth mobility visa with your part-time job was enough to cover the cost of living in Portugal?
Yeah, because of the transition so if I was working part-time in Portugal, that probably would not have been the case. But because I was working part-time in Toronto online, and nowadays, like, there's a lot of remote jobs that you can get, or even opportunities to work remotely within your company. So then that transition made it so that you can survive and you can thrive actually in such a situation. Um, so yeah, it was really shocking to sort of crunch the numbers and realize that I didn't need to use my savings, but obviously you need to take into consideration things that you didn't expect. For example, travel plans, because I wasn't expecting that I would do like 2 trips while I'm on my youth mobility visa, and those obviously cost extra, and you also have to account for.
Let's talk about those trips. Where did you travel during the youth mobility visa?
The first trip was to Paris because I met a lot of French and they were very generous and loving and supportive. I was like, I want to go and check out France. And so Paris was the first destination. And my experience there wasn't the best. Expectation versus reality is always, tricky. It's a beautiful city, not to say anything about the city, but there's a lot of racism and underlying problems that you visibly see that you don't necessarily see in Toronto, which might be there in Toronto, but you don't see. So it was a little bit painful to go through that. And then I went to Berlin because I've wanted to explore like something further than, just the west coast of Europe. And then I really fell in love with the city because it's such a multicultural, diverse, easy to get around kind of city. They have a lot of public transportation, which it kind of lacks a little bit in Lisbon if you are living a little bit on the outskirts, because they're still building their infrastructure. And once I figured out like the beauty of being in, discovering new places and everything, I was like, yeah, this is a lifestyle that I would like to continue with. But I couldn't last more than 5 months. I felt not homesick per se, but if you're not making friends that last a long time, um, and obviously it depends on the person, but for me, I really value like deep connections. So I found myself like having to make new connections very often and not having to keep deep connections a long term. So I decided to switch my life around and reconnect with my roots. So I decided I'll move back to Lebanon, which is something I never thought I would do, to be closer to my family. And within a few months, I'll have enough sort of uh, projects and things that I've worked on to propel me to the next step. And then I'll be able to do a new country every, 2-3 months. And so now my whole life is reshifted around digital nomadship instead of, being focused on work or just stressing over life. And, it's a lot more fun.
This gave you the wanderlust to go and build your life around that kind of lifestyle.
Yes, yeah, and I'm obviously like I would love to do a lot of countries in South America at some point. So by then I'd move back to Canada and like be closer to, traveling in that direction and have my friends family there. So it's like I'm building centers where I can be there for longer periods that have long-term connections and friends and family. And then you can go onto your trajectories, learn about these cultures, and come back to the center. I think that's a safer option and more sustainable one if you really value like deep connections like I do. But some people can do it.
Tell me, like during your time in Portugal, what were your favorite spots? Because I think you stayed mostly in Lisbon. So what are some of your favorite spots in and around Lisbon?
So the beauty of Lisbon is it's made up of like 7 different hills, and that every hill has its own like ambience to it. So really getting to know each one in and out was a lot of fun. And even like the cultures are different. So there's some that are more like touristic and some that are more local, and the different views of the heights that at which you see the ocean or the bridge or whatnot is just very magical. There's a lot of romantic vibes in Lisbon. The beach is obviously like my favorite. I went to the beach at least once a week, which is something I never thought I could do in life.
Which beach was your favorite?
It was the one across the bridge. So you had to cross down from Lisbon to the nearby city, which
Caparica.
is not far. Caparica, yeah. And that's where all the French people live. Fun fact. There's a lot of French in that place. And I liked going to like restaurants to explore new types of food. Obviously, there's a lot of Spanish cuisines and Venezuelan and Brazilian, and there's a lot of variety there that you don't necessarily hear about or have access to in Canada.
And so, do you have any tips and tricks that you'd like to share with the people watching on how to travel on a budget?
Definitely have a plan to cook your own food. I mean, I was eating out like 3 times. I was like living lavishly, eating out 3 or 4 times a week, which again, I was like happy to explore this field. But then I realized like I could be saving even more if I was to go back to my old habits and cooking regularly. Food is very cheap to sort of like groceries are very cheap in Portugal compared to Toronto. So I found myself spending a lot less on food there, and also like going, sticking to your habits. Just, like if you want to sustain this lifestyle, you have to go back to sticking to your habits and not like going out every night and whatever, because it's not a vacation. You're basically living in a different country, right? So maintaining, there's a lot of things I could do without paying money, like going to the beach is free, and going to parks, meeting people in those clubs, like a meetup. A lot of it is for free. And yeah, so basically stick to what you've been used to. You're telling me to give advice to people who live in Toronto. Like they know how to be frugal,
yes,
because that's the only way to live.
So just keep applying whatever you do in Toronto. You'll have a good life in Portugal.
Pretty much, yeah. You'll be surprised what we do to save money, in Toronto. And transportation is extremely affordable too. But I found myself walking everywhere because it was a very small city. So yeah, get in shape, walk a lot, explore.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about applying for a youth mobility visa to Portugal?
First, start by doing your research. Why it is that you want to get to go to Portugal specifically. Find out what city suits you best. There's a lot of different variety between Porto, Lisbon, and then there's also there's a south, but there's also islands in Portugal that you can visit, the Azores, which are very different. It's like going to Hawaii versus going to mainland USA. Like, do your research, figure out why you're there and what you want to achieve, and then work your way backwards. Do a lot of planning, make sure you have enough funds, because you don't want to be rushing and getting scared after 2-3 months and be like, I ran out of money. And just enjoy the process, and don't think that you want to implement your own belief or your own lifestyle onto the new country, because you're there to learn from that space. So you have to become, like they say, do like the Romans do when you're in Rome. So, you have to be willing to navigate those newfound paths.
Yeah, that's all. Nicely said. I think it's very motivating for anyone who's watching. So, Wei-Am, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing this amazing experience you've had working and traveling in Portugal. So now it's your turn. If you're watching and you have any questions, just write them down below. I see that while we were talking, a few people have already asked questions. So I'm going to take 2 of them that we're going to answer right away. And the rest of you, don't be shy. Still write your questions, and we're going to take the time, either Wei-Am with his experience in Portugal, myself with the experience of the working holiday visa, and we'll also have someone, an expert from International Experience Canada, who'll be able to answer any specific questions that you might have about the program in general. So let's have a look. Someone is asking, how do you find that? How do you like Portugal as a digital nomad?
How do I like Portugal as a digital nomad?
Yes, would you recommend it as a destination for a digital nomad?
Yeah, 100%, because it is very designed to, not necessarily designed in that sense, but like all the elements for digital nomadship really exist there. I mean, when you think about digital nomad needs, you need sort of a good internet, you need a good transportation, a place that has good weather, because you're there to enjoy your time as well as, you know, do your work while you're enjoying your time. And there's a lot of expats and ways to connect and do PR work there. I met a few people that like turn them into potential clients at some point. Like, it is a great city for that. I would say it would make more sense if you're someone who's quiet and calm. Like if you're someone that likes party city central kind of atmosphere, then maybe Lisbon is not for you. It felt more like very old and wise, lady. Like it's just elegant, but relaxed. Like people don't rush and fight or something like that. It's very relaxed. So you have all the elements you need to work and enjoy your time and enjoy the weather and the food and connect and do a lot of PR work. So highly recommended. Yes.
And another question, someone is asking, what did you miss most about Canada while you were away?
I mean, obviously family and friends. Like, you can never not miss your family and friends unless you're, I know, a Gemini or something. No, that's a joke. I love you, Gemini. But like, I also missed the orderliness of Toronto. Like, you knew exactly what time the bus comes and exactly what to do when you're in trouble and how to order food and all the orderliness. That's something you'll miss, because when you're moving a lot, there's a lot of new things on the way that you have to learn and move from. And so I want to wake up and know exactly what to do that day instead of having to figure it out. But, you can still do that after a few months of being in a place. You'll get used to it.
Now that you're away from Portugal, what do you miss most about Portugal?
The sunny, everyday experience. It was so inspiring. Like, I never realized how depressing winter could be until I experienced a non-winter winter. Because the temperature doesn't go below 15 degrees Celsius. I literally swam in January. I mean, it was crazy. Like for a Torontonian, the temperature was a great temperature to swim in. But for the locals, it was like too cold. So obviously. I also missed the slow pace of it. It's like very relaxing. It's like going on a retreat. So those are top things I miss. And the fish there is very fresh, not frozen, very flavorful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Liam, and for sharing your experience. As I mentioned, you'll find all the links for International Experience Canada in the comments below. So if you need more information or to just look the details, the processes to apply for a working holiday visa, whether in Portugal or any of the 30 destinations, check in the comment. And one last thing before we leave, there's plenty of other videos that we've done about the working holiday visa with people that have gone to super exciting destinations like New Zealand, Chile, Scotland. So make sure you watch the videos. We'll also put the links in the comment and join us for all those other events. So thanks again, Liam, for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Sophia. Very nice to meet you and meet the team and be part of this. Very exciting.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.